The aliens were surrounded by hunter ships, and then the human broke the siege. The Gorith Corridor was not a place anyone wanted to be. It was a long stretch of dead space between two neutral star systems, far from any trade lane and far from any help. There were no stations out here. No patrol routes. No listening posts. Just old rock, cold stars, and silence that went on for millions of kilometers in every direction. Most ships avoided it. The ones that did not were either desperate, lost, or very confident in their weapons. The Velhari diplomatic convoy had taken the corridor as a shortcut. Ambassador Sarah had approved the route herself. The Gorith corridor saved 3 full days of travel time, and the peace talks she was heading to could not afford delays. The Velhari were not a warrior species. They had no fleet to speak of, and they had built their place in the galaxy on words, agreements, and careful relationships. The convoy was small, 1 diplomatic ship and 2 light escort vessels. That was enough to satisfy protocol. It was not nearly enough for what came next. The Kroth appeared without warning. One moment the sensors showed empty space. The next, 15 Kroth hunter ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a formation so precise it looked practiced. It was practiced. The Kroth had been watching the Velhari convoy for days, tracking the route, waiting for the right moment. The Gorith corridor was that moment. There was northwest better place in that region of space to run a siege. No traffic. No witnesses. No one to call. The hunter ships moved quickly. They spread out in a wide ring around the Velhari convoy and then they tightened it, each vessel closing the distance until they formed a near-perfect sphere of firepower around the 3 Velhari ships. Sarah stood at the bridge window and watched it happen. She had seen Kroth fleet formations in briefing files before. She had read the reports. Reading about it and watching it close around you like a fist were 2 very different things. Her communications officer, a young Velhari named Oren, turned from his station with a pale look on his face. He told her the long-range comms were gone. The Kroth were jamming every signal band they had. No messages in or out. The escort vessels reported the same. Every jump route on the navigation charts was blocked by a Kroth ship sitting right on the exit point. Moving toward any of them would mean flying directly into weapons range. There was no gap. There was no angle. The sphere was complete. Sarah sat down in her chair slowly. She was not a person who fell apart under pressure. She had spent 40 years in Velhari diplomacy and she had walked out of rooms where the air was so tense it felt like it could crack. But this was not a room she could walk out of. She asked her crew for options and they gave her the honest truth: there were none. The Kroth did not besiege ships to negotiate. They besieged ships to break them. They would sit out there and wait, cutting off food, power recharging, and hope, until the Velhari convoy surrendered or until it stopped moving entirely. What Sarah did not know, and could not have known, was that her emergency beacon had not failed completely. 3 seconds before the Kroth jamming locked down every signal band, the convoy's beacon had fired off a ghost ping. It was short. It was faint. It carried almost no data. Under normal circumstances it would have meant nothing, too weak to be tracked, too brief to be useful. But 12 light minutes away, a human patrol vessel had been running a passive sensor sweep of the corridor while its crew ate dinner. The UES Relentless was a mid-class patrol ship. It was not a warship. It had weapons, because all human vessels had weapons, but it was built for survey work, border monitoring, and the kind of quiet duties that did not make it into history files. The crew was 22 people. Commander Dale Rourke had been commanding her for 3 years, and in that time the most dramatic thing they had dealt with was a mining claim dispute near the edge of human space. Dale was in the mess hall when his sensor officer, a quiet man named Greg Talley, knocked on the door frame and told him they had picked up something strange. Greg pulled up the ping on his handheld screen and showed it to Dale. It was weak. The location tagged it to the Gorith corridor. The signal pattern matched a Velhari emergency beacon, but it had cut off almost immediately. Dale looked at it for a long time. The rest of the crew at the table kept eating. One of them, Engineer Pete Holt, glanced over and asked what it was. Dale told him it looked like a distress ping from the corridor. Pete said that the corridor was technically outside their patrol zone and that the ping was barely readable. He was not wrong on either count. Dale handed the screen back to Greg and told him to plot a course to the source coordinates. Nobody argued with him. That was not how things worked on the Relentless. When Dale made a call, he had usually already thought it through faster than most people could frame the question. The crew trusted that. They finished their food and went back to their stations. Carla Voss, the ship's navigator, had the course ready in 4 minutes. She told Dale they could reach the edge of the corridor in just under 2 hours at full faster-than-light speed. Dale told her to go. Then he walked to the small briefing room off the bridge and pulled up everything in the ship's database on Croth fleet tactics. He read for a long time. He read about the siege formations, the jamming protocols, the hunter ship design specs, and the historical record of Croth engagements. The Croth had never lost a siege once it was fully closed. Not once in the 80 years of recorded contact between the Croth and the rest of the galactic community. Every ship that had been caught in a full sphere formation had either surrendered or been destroyed. Several species had tried to send relief fleets and been driven off. The Croth were not the most powerful fleet in the galaxy, but they were specialists, and their specialty was this, surrounding something completely and squeezing until it gave. Dale closed the files and stared at the wall for a while. Then he got up and went to find Pete and Weapons Chief Nina Graves. He did not tell them the odds. They could read the same files he could. What he told them instead was that he had a question he wanted them to think about on the way. The question was not whether the Relentless could outfight 15 Croth hunter ships. The answer to that question was obvious and not useful. The question he wanted them thinking about was simpler than that. He asked them what the Croth needed in order for their siege to work. Pete and Nina exchanged a look. Nina said the answer seemed straightforward: the Croth needed the formation to hold. Every ship in position, no gaps, no variables. The sphere only worked if it was a sphere. Dale nodded. He said that was exactly right. He walked back to the bridge and watched the stars blur past as the Relentless ran hard toward the Goreth corridor, toward 15 enemy warships, toward a siege that had never been broken by anything. He was already thinking about how to break it. The aliens were surrounded by hunter ships, and then the human broke the siege. The Relentless dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the very edge of the Goreth corridor, and for a moment the bridge was completely quiet. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The main display said everything worth saying. 15 Croth hunter ships, spread across the sensor screen in a tight circular formation, every one of them sitting in exactly the position that Croth doctrine called for. The sphere was complete. In the middle of it, barely readable through the interference the Croth jamming was putting out, were 3 small Velhari ship signatures, the convoy, still there, still alive, going nowhere. Carla Voss looked at the display and then looked at Dale. She did not say anything dramatic. She just told him the numbers. 15 hostile vessels. Each one carrying more firepower than the Relentless had on its best day. The combined weapons output of that formation could reduce the patrol ship to scrap in under 40 seconds if every Croth captain opened fire at the same time. Dale looked at the display for a long moment and then asked if the Croth had detected them yet. Greg Talley checked his sensor board and said the Croth ships were running active jamming inward, toward the convoy. Their outward sensor sweep was standard passive range. The Relentless had dropped in just outside that range and was running quiet. For now, they were invisible. Dale said good and told Carla to hold position. He pulled up a chair at the navigation console and stared at the formation for a long time. The rest of the crew watched him without making it obvious they were watching him. This was a habit the crew had developed over 3 years, reading Dale without interrupting him, because interrupting him when he was thinking cost more time than it saved. Pete Holt came onto the bridge from the engineering section, wiping his hands on a cloth. He looked at the display, took in the full picture, and sat down in the seat next to Dale without being asked. He was a big man, calm and slow-moving, and he had the kind of face that did not show much. He looked at the formation for a while and then said, quietly, that there were a lot of them. Dale said yes. Pete asked if they were going to do something about it. Dale said they were working on it. Nina Graves arrived a few minutes later from the weapons station. She had a slim tablet in her hand and she was already scrolling through it. Nina was the kind of person who started preparing before she knew what she was preparing for. She had pulled up the full Croth Hunter ship technical file and was reading the weapons and sensor specs with the focused expression she always wore when she was measuring a problem. She told Dale that a direct engagement was out. Not a close call, just completely out. Even a perfect first strike from the Relentless would disable 2 or 3 Hunter ships at best, and then the other 12 would end it fast. She was not being negative. She was just reading the math the way it was written. Dale said he knew. He told her direct engagement was not what he was thinking about. Nina asked what he was thinking about. Dale pointed at the formation on the display. He traced the ring of ships with one finger and asked her what she saw. She said she saw 15 warships in a siege sphere. Dale asked her what she saw beyond that. Nina looked again and said she saw a formation that had no way to deal with a problem that came from outside, because it was built to face inward. Every weapon angle, every sensor cluster, every firing solution on those ships was oriented toward the middle of the sphere, toward the target. The outside of the formation was the Crotha's back. Dale said that was the first useful thing. Pete said the second useful thing would help too, if they had one. Dale pointed to a gap in the formation on the upper right side of the sphere. Not a real gap, the ships were close enough that any attempt to fly through it would mean crossing under the weapons arc of at least 2 Hunter ships. But it was the loosest point. The Croth had placed their heaviest vessels at the 4 cardinal positions of the sphere and spaced the lighter ships between them. The upper right position was between 2 of the lighter ships, and because of the geometry of the sphere at that angle, their overlapping fire coverage was slightly thinner than anywhere else. Slightly was not much. Slightly was not enough on its own. But Dale was not looking for one thing. He was building something out of several small things, the way humans often did when they did not have the obvious tool for the job. He asked Carla how fast she could get the Relentless to the edge of Croth sensor range on the upper right side of the sphere without being detected. Carla ran the calculation and said 11 minutes at minimum emission drift. Dale told her to start. Then he turned to Pete and asked him a technical question about the relay buoy system in the ship's cargo bay. The Relentless carried 3 of them, small automated signal devices used for long-range communication in deep space. Pete said they were functional and could be launched from the port side tube. Dale asked how far a buoy could transmit a tight burst message before the Croth jamming would block it. Pete said the buoy itself could not outrun the jamming, but if it was launched on a fast ballistic trajectory away from the formation before it broadcast, it could get 3 light minutes clear before it sent. At that range the jamming would not reach it. Dale nodded slowly. He asked Pete to have one buoy ready for launch and to load it with the ship's full passive sensor record of the last 20 minutes, every Croth ship ID, every position coordinate, every formation detail the Relentless had recorded since arriving at the edge of the corridor. Pete asked who the transmission would be addressed to. Dale said everyone. The Galactic Compact. Every independent power in the region. The Velhari High Council. Every address in the ship's communication directory. He wanted the data to go to as many receivers as possible the moment the buoy broadcast. Pete looked at him for a second and then said he understood. He went back to engineering. Nina watched him go and then looked at Dale. She asked him if the plan was to threaten the Croth with exposure, make them choose between finishing the siege and becoming a galactic incident. Dale said that was part of it. Nina asked what the other part was. Dale said the other part was making sure the Croth believed it was already happening, so that they reacted before they thought. He told her that the Croth were disciplined in their siege doctrine because their doctrine was built on certainty. They had done this enough times that they knew how it ended. They needed to stop knowing how it ended. Nina was quiet for a moment and then said that it was a reasonable plan for a patrol ship facing 15 warships. Dale said it was the only plan they had. The Relentless drifted slowly around the edge of the Goreth corridor, running quiet and dark, moving toward the upper right side of the sphere while the Croth fleet sat in its perfect formation and watched the 3 Velhari ships go nowhere. Inside the convoy, Ambassador Sarah sat in the dim light of the diplomatic ship's bridge and waited. Her crew had stopped talking much. There was not much to say. The Croth formation had not moved in hours. The jamming had not lifted. The escort vessels were holding position and conserving power. Sarah was a patient person by nature, but patience only helped when there was something to wait for. She did not know that something was already moving in the dark at the edge of the corridor. She did not know that a human had looked at an impossible situation and started asking different questions. She was about to find out, #the aliens were surrounded by hunter ships, and then the human broke the siege. The Relentless reached its position at the edge of Croth sensor range without being detected. Carla had done the drift perfectly, using the ship's minimum emission profile and the natural shadow of a debris cluster to cover the final approach. On the sensor screen, the Croth formation glowed steady and unchanged. 15 ships. Still in position. Still locked on the convoy at the center. Dale stood at the communications console and looked at the panel for a moment. Greg Talley sat beside him with the wideband transmitter ready. The channel was open and waiting. All Dale had to do was start talking. He had thought carefully about what to say. Not the words exactly, but the tone. The Croth understood strength the way they understood siege, in terms of certainty. They pressed because they were certain the outcome was already decided. The only way to shake a Croth commander was to introduce doubt, and the only way to introduce doubt was to present something that their training had not prepared them for. A patrol ship asking them to stop would mean nothing. A patrol ship telling them that they had already lost something, that was different. Dale opened the channel. He spoke in the Croth trade tongue. His accent was not perfect, but his vocabulary was correct, and he kept his voice calm and flat. He did not introduce himself. He did not name his ship. He opened by telling the Croth fleet commander that the ships in his formation had already been identified. Every vessel. Every position. Every formation coordinate logged with timestamp. He let that sit for 2 seconds. Then he told the commander that this data was compressed and loaded into a relay buoy that was currently on a ballistic trajectory away from the Goreth corridor. The buoy would reach clear broadcast range in 4 minutes. At that point it would transmit to the Galactic Compact, to 17 independent powers, to the Velhari High Council, and to every communication relay in the region. The transmission would include full identification of every Croth ship present and their exact positions during an illegal siege of a diplomatic convoy in neutral space. He paused again. Then he told the commander that the only way to stop the transmission was to destroy the buoy before it reached broadcast range. And he told him exactly which direction it had been launched. Then Dale closed the channel. The bridge of the Relentless was completely silent. Everyone was watching the sensor screen. For a long moment the Croth formation did not move. The 15 ships held their positions exactly as they had been holding them for hours. Dale stood at the console without moving, without speaking, and without showing anything on his face. Greg said quietly that the Croth commander had received the transmission. His communications board was showing acknowledgement signals from the Croth fleet channel, which meant the message had been decoded and passed to the command ship. The silence stretched out. Then 2 Croth hunter ships broke formation. They moved fast, faster than the sensor display could update cleanly, peeling away from the upper left side of the sphere and accelerating hard in the direction Dale had given for the buoy. They were not moving casually. They were running at full drive power, which meant the commander had panicked just enough to act before thinking. On the screen the sphere now had a gap in it. Not a large gap, but a real one. 2 ships gone from the upper left side, and the ships on either side of the gap had not closed it yet because the formation software would need a moment to recognize the break and issue the adjustment order. Carla Voss said, in a very quiet voice, that there was a gap. Dale said he saw it. He told Pete over the internal comm that the first phase was done. Pete said he was ready. Nina Graves was already at the weapons console. She had been there since before the transmission, running through a targeting solution she had spent the last hour building. It was not a killing solution. It was not designed to destroy anything. What Nina had built was a sustained rail pulse, a focused electromagnetic discharge from the ship's forward array that would not penetrate Croth armor but would absolutely saturate the close-range sensor clusters on the 2 hunter ships at the edges of the remaining gap. The sensor clusters were mounted externally on the hunter ship design, exposed for maximum field of view. That design decision had made sense when the Croth built the ships. It was about to become a problem. Nina asked Dale if she should fire. Dale said yes. The Relentless shuddered once as the forward rail array discharged. On the sensor screen 2 of the hunter ships on the upper right side of the formation flared with interference, their outward sensor arrays overloaded by the pulse, their short-range vision effectively gone. They were not destroyed. They were not even badly damaged. But for the next several minutes they were running partly blind on the side facing the Relentless. The Kroth commander's response came fast. A wideband signal opened on the Kroth fleet channel and the commander's voice came through, sharp and controlled. He told Dale, in the trade tongue, that the Relentless was one ship. He told him that destroying one patrol vessel was a trivial act and would cost him nothing. He told him to withdraw. Dale listened to the whole message. Then he told Greg to flag it as received and go back to monitoring. He did not respond to the commander. He did not argue, agree, or explain. He just kept working. This was something the Kroth commander had not expected, and the silence that followed the ignored message was a different kind of silence than the one before it. The commander had made a clear threat. It had been received and set aside like it was a minor inconvenience. That was not how any species behaved when facing 15 warships. The Kroth formation was trying to react to too many things at once. 2 ships were chasing a buoy that had a 4-minute head start. 2 ships on the upper right had compromised sensors. The command ship was issuing adjustment orders that the formation ships were starting to execute, but closing a broken formation took time, and the orders and the execution were not happening at the same speed. Pete's voice came over the internal comm. He said the buoy was still running and the Kroth ships chasing it were not going to catch it in time. The 2 hunter ships had fast drives, but the buoy had been launched on a direct line with a full propulsion burn, and the math was close enough that Pete was not fully certain the buoy would make it. Dale told him that was fine. Pete asked why it was fine if they were not sure the buoy would broadcast. Dale told him the Kroth did not know that. As far as the Kroth commander knew, the buoy was ahead of his ships and the transmission was going out regardless. The commander was already reacting to a threat he believed was real. Whether the buoy actually made it was almost beside the point. The damage to the formation had already been done. Carla said quietly that if they were going to move, now was the time to do it. The gap on the upper right was still open. The 2 ships with damaged sensors had not yet moved to compensate. In about 90 seconds the formation adjustment orders would finish executing and the sphere would start to close again. Dale told her to go. Carla's hands moved across the navigation panel and the Relentless accelerated hard toward the gap, driving straight at the heart of a Kroth siege formation with everything the drive system had. Inside the convoy ship, Sarah's sensor officer suddenly shouted that a new contact had appeared on the edge of their limited sensor range, a ship, coming in fast from the upper right, broadcasting a human identification signal. Sarah stood up and stared at the display. There was a gap in the formation. 2 Kroth ships were gone from the upper left and 2 more on the upper right were reading strange on the sensors. And a single human vessel was flying directly toward the opening like it had always known it was going to be there. Sarah watched the incoming ship grow larger on the display. She had never in her life seen anything quite like this. The aliens were surrounded by hunter ships, and then the human broke the siege. The gap in the formation was closing. Carla could see it on the navigation screen. The Kroth adjustment orders had reached the ships on either side of the break and they were already moving, slow at first, then faster as their drive systems built up speed. The sphere was trying to seal itself the way a wound tries to close. In about 60 seconds, maybe less, the gap would be too narrow to fly through without coming directly under weapons fire from both sides at once. The Relentless was already going as fast as she had ever gone. Carla did not look up from her console. She was making small adjustments every few seconds, reading the closing geometry of the gap and threading the approach vector through it the way you thread a needle while someone is pulling the thread hole away from you. There was no room for a large error. There was barely room for a small one. But Carla Voss had been navigating for 12 years and she had flown tighter lines than this in worse conditions, and she did not waste time thinking about whether she could do it. She just did it. The Kroth ships on either side of the gap were firing now. Not at the Relentless directly. The sensor damage Nina had put on the 2 hunter ships meant their targeting on that side was degraded, and the ships at the edge of the gap were at an angle that made a clean firing solution difficult without risking their own formation ships. What they were doing instead was laying down a suppression field, broad energy bursts designed to disrupt a ship's navigation systems and force it to break off the approach. It was the right call under Kroth doctrine. Against most ships it would have worked. The Relentless flew straight through it. The hull shook. Several non-essential systems went offline, 2 lighting banks in the lower deck, a secondary sensor relay, the water recycler in the crew quarters. The bridge flickered once. Carla did not move her hands from the console. Pete had preemptively routed power away from everything non-critical and pushed it all to navigation, shields, and drive. The ship absorbed the suppression fire and kept going. Nina was running her ECM burst pattern simultaneously. She had built it from 3 different human naval combat manuals and a 4th protocol she had pulled from an old Earth fleet history archive, a method originally developed for atmospheric combat that had never been formally adopted because it required a specific power routing configuration that most ships did not maintain. The Relentless, with Pete's emergency rerouting, happened to be in exactly that configuration right now. The ECM pattern hit the Croth ship's targeting systems at 3 different frequency bands in a rotating sequence, and the effect was that their active targeting kept slipping off the Relentless like it was trying to hold onto something wet. The Croth had no counter for it. Their tactical database had no entry for that specific burst pattern combined with that specific power configuration. Their targeting systems tried to compensate and kept failing, and the hunter ship captains, trained for certainty and precision, did not know how to respond to a system telling them it had a lock and then immediately telling them it had lost it again. The Relentless flew through the gap with about 40 meters of clearance on each side. The bridge crew did not cheer. There was no time for it. They were now inside the formation, and the situation inside was different from the situation outside. The Croth ships had not been expecting anything to break through and they were reorienting, slowly, because their weapons and sensors were built to face inward toward the convoy target, not to engage something that had just entered the sphere from outside. But slowly did not mean they were stopped, and Dale knew the window he had was short. Carla was already driving toward the Velhari convoy ship at the center. Dale opened a channel on the frequency his database listed for Velhari diplomatic vessels and identified himself. He said this was Commander Dale Rourke of the UES Relentless, and he told Sarah that he was coming alongside her ship. He told her to tell her convoy to form up tight on his starboard side and to match his speed the moment he reached them. He told her they were going to move on his mark and that she needed to be ready to move fast. There was a moment of silence on the channel. Then Sarah's voice came back. It was calm. Dale had half expected panic or disbelief, but her voice was steady, like someone who had made peace with the situation and was now simply ready to deal with whatever came next. She said she understood. She said the convoy would be ready. Dale said good and closed the channel. Pete's voice came over the internal comm. He said the 2 Croth ships chasing the buoy were still running and had not turned back yet, which meant the commander had not called them off. Pete said the buoy had reached broadcast range about 40 seconds ago and had transmitted. It was done. The data was out. Dale asked if the Croth commander knew that yet. Pete said the commander's ship had changed its signal output about 20 seconds ago in a way that suggested his communication systems had registered the broadcast. He knew. Dale thought about that for a second. He asked Pete what the commander was going to do now. Pete said he had no idea. He was an engineer, not a commander. Dale said fair enough and went back to watching the formation on the sensor screen. The Croth ships were reorienting faster now. The adjustment orders had gone out again, this time not just to close a gap but to deal with an intruder inside the sphere. 3 hunter ships on the far side of the formation were angling inward, repositioning to get a clean firing angle on the Relentless without endangering the rest of the formation. The Croth commander was professional. He was adapting. He was just adapting to a situation that kept changing faster than his doctrine could keep up with. The Relentless reached the Velhari convoy ship and Carla pulled up alongside with the kind of smooth, controlled precision that only came from a lot of practice and a very good sense of spatial geometry. The 2 escort vessels slid into position on the outer edges without being told to. Sarah had clearly briefed them the moment Dale's message came in. Dale looked at the formation on the screen. 3 hunter ships coming in from the far side. The gap behind the Relentless had closed completely, they were sealed inside now, which meant going back the way they came was not an option. The only open direction was forward, through the opposite side of the sphere, where the formation was thinner because the Croth had pulled ships to deal with the buoy and to respond to the break-in. He pulled up Carla's navigation console on his secondary screen and looked at the geometry. There was a line through it. Narrow. Ugly. It would pass under the weapons arc of 1 heavy hunter ship and cut across the field of 2 lighter ones. It was the kind of approach that any sane navigator would look at and say there had to be a better option. There was not a better option. Dale marked the line on the screen and sent it to Carla's display. She looked at it for exactly 2 seconds and then said she had it. She did not say it was fine. She did not say it would be easy. She just said she had it, which was the only thing that needed saying. Nina was already running the targeting solution for a second suppression burst, not to destroy the ships on the exit line, but to light up their sensor arrays the same way she had on the entry, buying Carla the fraction of a second of targeting delay that made the difference between getting through and not getting through. Dale opened the channel to Sarah again and told her they were moving in 10 seconds. He told her to stay tight on the starboard side, match every course correction, and not slow down for anything until he said stop. Sarah said she understood. Dale counted down to himself. Then he told Carla to go. The aliens were surrounded by hunter ships, and then the human broke the siege. The exit was worse than the entry. On the entry, the Relentless had been alone and fast, and the element of surprise had been worth something. On the exit, the Croth knew exactly what was happening. The 3 ships on the far side of the formation had their weapons hot, and their captains were not making the same targeting mistakes twice. They had compensated for the ECM pattern as best they could, running their systems on manual lock instead of automated acquisition. It was slower and less accurate, but it was harder to jam. Carla flew the exit line like she was reading it off a clean chart. She did not flinch when the first energy burst hit the hull and knocked out the aft sensor cluster. She did not react when the second hit shook the entire ship hard enough that 2 crew members in the lower corridor fell over. She made her adjustments and kept the course and did not stop. The Velhari convoy ship stayed on the starboard side exactly where it was supposed to be. The 2 escort vessels held their positions. Sarah had good pilots. They did not panic and they did not hesitate, and they trusted the line Carla was flying even when it took them within close range of 2 hunter ships that were trying very hard to lock on. Nina's suppression burst hit both of the lighter hunter ships on the exit line at the same moment the Relentless passed between them. Their targeting systems slipped again, not completely, not for long, but enough. The fire that came through was heavy and it hit a ship that was already past the worst of the angle, and the shots that would have been killing shots instead struck the aft section where Pete had reinforced the shield routing. The Relentless took the hits and kept moving. And then they were through. The sphere was behind them. Open space was ahead. The neutral beacon marker that Carla had already plotted was on the screen, 3 light minutes out and getting closer every second. Dale looked at the sensor display and watched the Croth formation behind them. The sphere had collapsed the moment the convoy broke through. There was no formation to hold anymore, no siege to maintain. The Croth ships were free to move, and several of them were moving, turning onto a pursuit heading. Dale watched them. Then he watched the 2 ships that had been chasing the buoy. They were coming back, converging on the fleet's new position. The commander was reforming. Pete's voice came over the comm. He said the buoy transmission had been confirmed, received by the Galactic Compact Relay Station. The data was in the system. The Compact's automated acknowledgement had come back clean, full receipt, all addresses confirmed. There was no undoing it. Every power in the region had the coordinates, the ship IDs, and the formation data from the Croth siege. It was public record now. Dale watched the pursuit heading on the screen. The Croth ships were fast, but the Relentless and the convoy were already at full drive and the distance was opening. It was going to be close for the first few minutes, but the numbers were moving in the right direction. The Croth commander opened a channel. He did not speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it that had not been there in his earlier message. Dale recognized it. He had heard it in people before, the specific sound of someone who has realized that the situation they were certain about is no longer the situation they are in. The commander told Dale that the Relentless had made a serious mistake. He said that what had happened today would be addressed through proper channels. He said the human vessel had interfered in Croth operational space and that there would be consequences. Dale listened to the full message. He noted that the commander had not threatened to destroy the convoy. He had not said the Croth ships were going to pursue. He had talked about channels and consequences, which were words people used when they were transitioning from a position of action to a position of complaint. Dale opened the channel and said, very simply, that he looked forward to discussing it at the Compact. Then he closed the channel and told Greg to stop monitoring the Kroth fleet comm and start broadcasting the convoy's position on the open emergency band so that every ship in the region knew where they were. The Kroth ships slowed. It happened in stages. First the two closest pursuit ships cut their drive output, then the others followed over the next 2 minutes, until the whole formation was drifting rather than chasing. The commander had made his call. The data was already out. Pursuing the convoy now would add another layer to the incident, and the Kroth were exposed enough. The value of the siege was gone. The convoy was free. The cost of continuing was going up every second. The commander chose to stop. The Relentless and the Velhari convoy reached the neutral beacon marker without being fired on again. The crew of the Relentless was quiet for a while after that. Not the quiet of people who were shocked, but the quiet of people who were very tired and who were allowing themselves to feel it now that the thing was done. Pete went back to engineering to start assessing the damage from the hits they had taken. Nina sat at her weapons console and went through her logs. Greg made tea and brought cups to the bridge without being asked. Carla sat back in her navigation chair and closed her eyes for about 30 seconds. Then she opened them and started running a post-flight check on the drive systems. Dale stood at the main window and looked out at the stars. After a while his comm unit chimed. It was the Velhari convoy ship. He answered it. Sarah's voice was different from the comm efficiency it had carried during the escape. There was something in it now that Dale could not immediately name, not emotion exactly, but the kind of weight that comes into a person's voice when they are trying to find words that are big enough for what they want to say. She told him that she had been in diplomatic service for 40 years. She said she had been in rooms with the hardest negotiations the Velhari had ever faced. She said she had sat across tables from species that terrified her people and had still kept talking because walking out was not an option. She said she understood the word impossible the way most people understood the word common. Then she asked him how one ship had broken a 15-vessel siege. Dale thought about how to answer that. He could have said it was the buoy strategy, or the ECM pattern Nina had built, or the way Pete had rerouted the power systems. All of those things were true. But they were not the real answer. He told her that humans had spent a very long time learning how to get out of situations they were not supposed to get out of. He said it went back a long time, further than space travel, further than any technology they had now. He said there had been a version of humanity that lived on a single world with nothing but what they could carry, and that world had been full of things that were bigger and faster and stronger, and humanity had survived anyway. Not by being the strongest. By refusing to accept that stronger meant the outcome was already decided. He said that somewhere in all those thousands of years, humans had stopped being able to look at bad odds and feel only fear. The fear was still there. But so was something else. The part that looked at bad odds and started asking questions. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then she said she was going to put every detail of this into her report to the Velhari High Council and to the Galactic Compact, and that she was going to recommend that every species in the Compact read it. Dale told her that was her call and that he appreciated it. She thanked him again and closed the channel. The report was filed 3 days later when the convoy reached Velhari space. It was detailed and precise in the way Sarah's reports always were, and it moved through the Compact's database fast. 43 species flagged it for review. Several of them filed their own inquiries about the Kroth engagement. The Kroth submitted a formal complaint that was reviewed, discussed at length, and quietly set aside in light of the siege documentation that Dale's buoy had already put into the public record. In the Compact's open ship registry, the entry for the UES Relentless was updated. It noted the vessel's class, its patrol designation, its crew size of 22, and its standard mission profile of border survey and monitoring. Below that, a single line was added. Last confirmed action, broke a Kroth siege of 15, Goreth corridor, neutral space. Convoy extracted intact. No lives lost. Nobody at the Compact added a comment to the entry. None was needed. Species across the galaxy read it, and most of them read it more than once, and almost all of them came away thinking the same thing about the species that had sent a patrol ship into a 15-vessel siege and come out the other side. They came away thinking that the humans were worth paying very close attention to.